President Bill Clinton is the founder of the William J. Clinton Foundation and the 42nd President of the United States. Elected in 1992 and again in 1996, he has long been engaged in addressing global environmental challenges. During his administration, he worked against climate change, adopted the toughest standards ever on soot and smog, and accelerated the cleanup of the nation's worst toxic waste sites. The Clinton Foundation addresses worldwide issues including climate change and sustainable growth and development through a portfolio of initiatives. Today, President Clinton sits down to answer questions about the environment from the DIGG community. This is a special Earth Day edition of DIGG Dialogue with President Clinton.
Hello, thanks for joining us for our 18th episode of DIGG Dialogue. I'm Babak Firzbaht, and today we're joined by President Bill Clinton for a special Earth Day edition of DIGG Dialogue. President Clinton, thank you for being here today. The DIGG community is honored to have you here and to ask you questions regarding the environment and the climate crisis.
Thanks.
And if you don't know about DIGG Dialogue, these are questions I didn't pick or any editor. These are questions picked and voted by 40 million users of Digg.com. And over the past few days, we've had over 1,000 questions submitted. And today we're going to focus on ones of Earth Day, climate change, and the environment. So I'll just begin by reading the question along with the username of the person and how many digs they used, which brought them up to the top of the list. So let's go on with question number 1, submitted by Jerry James Stone with 165 digs. And he asks, how can we best engage our nation's youth on issues surrounding climate change?
I think there are two things that ought to be done. First, I think that we should begin in elementary school teaching people about sustainability and about the imperative of preserving our resources as well as combating climate change. I think, frankly, what you did in getting your school, the University of Texas at Arlington, to adopt a sustainability course as a mandatory part of the curriculum is something that ought to be done in every institution of higher education in America. But I think this work should be done in elementary school. We know that children's instincts always direct them to be more green. They want to do it, so the more they know, the better they'll do. The second thing I think that we should do is to give every young person the means to maximize the environment of their schools. They're all in school somewhere, public or private. And we should be right now engaged in retrofitting every school in America. Every school should have a garden if they have any grass. And I think getting young people organized in a systematic way to retrofit every school building in America and to plant a garden wherever possible is a good way to begin.
Yeah, creating a new culture. So let's just go on to the second question submitted by Daniel RH9, and he had 152 digs supported. So he asked, if you were president today, what different steps would you have taken today to ensure environmental conservation that you hadn't taken when you were president in the 90s?
Well, let me briefly talk about what we did do. First, Al Gore and I were, I think, very instrumental in getting the Kyoto Accord passed, and I signed it, but we couldn't get it ratified in the Senate. Then we formed something called a Partnership for the Next Generation Vehicles with the auto workers and the big three automakers with a goal toward tripling mileage. I issued executive orders to the GSA to upgrade the environmental standards of federal buildings, to transfer, to have 20% of the federal fleet running on clean energy within 5 years. Now, a lot of that was ignored, and we greened the White House. We dramatically reduced energy usage at the White House. If I were president today, because we now have a consensus that we didn't have then, that we have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and there are economical ways to do it, there are many things I would do. First, I would, as President Obama is now doing, I'd be trying to pass climate change legislation, a comprehensive bill that would price carbon, either with a cap and trade system or with a refundable energy tax, a carbon tax, kind of like what the Swedes did, which made them one of the 2 or 3 leading countries in the world in energy efficiency. Secondly, I believe that we ought to begin with the low-hanging fruit. The Center for American Progress gave us a study which indicates that half of our 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 could come from efficiency. But the financing is not there to allow building owners to pay back the loans that are involved in greening only from their utility savings. We had an agreement before the financial collapse from 5 banks to offer $1 billion each, but we should put we should be spending at least $150 billion on this. And the way to do it is for the federal government to offer a guarantee that works just like the SBA Small Business Guarantee Program does. That any building over a certain size that has an energy service company doing the audit and guaranteeing the savings, the bank will, the federal government would also offer a guarantee to the bank. So they'd have a double guarantee. Therefore, we can unleash all this bank lending. The banks in America today have $1.5 trillion of uncommitted cash reserves. If you could unlock $150 billion of that, you would deal with two problems. Number one, you get banks back in the lending business. Number two, you create over 1 million jobs. You get 7,000 jobs for every $1 billion spent on building retrofits, big building retrofits. It's far more than you get even from solar and wind, much less coal and nuclear. And it would have a huge impact on America, so I would do that. Next, I would take advantage of the recent international study which says our country ranks among all sizable countries in the world first in wind and third in solar and our potential to generate clean energy. So what should we do? We should selectively upgrade the grid because the sun shines best and the wind blows most in some places that don't have the grid capacity to carry the power back and distribute it. So that's where we ought to put our grid modernization, in those areas. The third thing I would do is to try to accelerate the development of the electric fleet in America. I'd give people tax incentives to convert. I would work with Walmart and others who've expressed their interest in establishing a national network of recharging stations and do whatever I could to accelerate that. And then I think we ought to, there are lots of other things I'd do. Let me just mention one other. I think we ought to close every big landfill in America and recycle everything that's recyclable and either use the rest to generate electricity so you escape the methane problem, or to provide cogeneration services for manufacturers. I'm trying to do that all over the world. We've got a big waste reduction project now going in Delhi in India and another big one in Lagos in Nigeria, and we're working on Mumbai, Mexico City, and other places with our climate change initiative. I think that's very important.
And thank you. Well, I believe you actually touched upon the next question by the Mad Hatter 444, who had 170 digs for this. And they mentioned, for a country that sets the standards for so many things, how have we fallen so far behind on issues like waste management and sustainability? And they add to that, how can we change this?
Well, the first thing I think is our system was developed, our governing system, our regulatory system, before we saw climate change as a global problem and a national problem. So the regulatory mechanisms are almost all state and local for matters affecting the environment. I believe that we should have national decoupling legislation to encourage utilities everywhere to finance their own sustainability investments. I believe there ought to be national new building standards. We ought to upgrade the standards for new buildings. And I think that I think there ought to be a national program to close all the landfills in the big cities, modeled on what we did when I was president, when we tripled the number of toxic waste sites that we closed. This would actually, I think, be cheaper, although it would involve more sites, because every one of these landfills is full of an economic resource. You can recycle the glass, the metal, the plastic, and you can turn all the other, the organic material can be turned into organic fertilizer, and everything else you can actually just avoid the methane emissions by cogeneration or electricity generation directly. And I think we ought to have a national program to promote that.
So Medium Mon with 100 digs wants to know what really happened to the electric car.
Well,
and I think a lot of people want to know that. So
a few years ago, there was a very widely watched documentary claiming that the energy interests tanked the electric car. And I remember when I was running for president in 1992, I visited Ed Begley Jr., who's a big environmentalist in California. He was already driving an electric car. But let's talk about today. The electric cars are coming back. You have several Japanese manufacturers offering them. The Chevy Volt is going to be on sale by the end of the year. And I think what we should do is to accelerate our production and use of electric cars and go as quickly electric as we can. Now, having said that, there are two cautionary tales. We have to do more research to try to get more powerful batteries with less material, because the batteries require lithium. A lot of it is in South America, but we don't have the mechanisms to take enough out of the ground for everybody to drive an electric car. Secondly, we haven't made batteries environmentally friendly yet, and you have to really be concerned about how you bury them. So we need a whole new industry to recycle what can be recycled out of batteries and to safely dispose of the rest. But I think that that's where we ought to go. And you know, if you look at the success of this Cash for Clunkers program, I think if we had a conversion program like that to encourage people to go electric, that was structured so that there would be enough recharging options for them when they did, we can move in a hurry. Now, the other thing I think we should think about is continuing to promote research on environmentally friendly biofuels that get very high mileage, because you don't have the disposal problems there. And at CGIU, where you just were in Miami, we have a young woman who just graduated from MIT in aerospace engineering, who's organized 23 universities to try to develop a 200-mile-per-gallon biofuel engine. We don't have to get that far to do as much good as we could do with half the fleet going electric, if, but only if, the biofuel production process was environmentally friendly. So I think we should be working on that.